Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever or whenever you're listening to us right now. And welcome to this bonus episode of the Churchosity Podcast. My name is Heath Brady.
And I'm Andrea Brady.
And we are your Churchosity Podcast personnel. These are the types of episodes that we like to call the postscripts, because these are the things that we like to think and talk about
when the record button is off.
So thank you once again for listening, and welcome to the Inner Circle. So Andy, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying this Revelation study as much as I am?
I am. I'm really enjoying it.
So we are 7 episodes in.
Yeah.
We are 5 letters in.
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite so far?
Oh, gee. I really loved Ephesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, they're the darling.
The darling.
Yeah.
The beloved.
Mm-hmm.
What specifically about that one is your favorite, would you say?
Well, I think, because it's the first letter, it was kind of the first church that you kind of exposed all of these little elements that you've been talking about this whole time.
Yeah.
How Christ, he gives himself a title, and then he talks about knowing their deeds and things like that. How, there's the format that we follow, and just how the theme of the letter falls in line with the name of the church and how cool that is. So I just really like that one.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
Well, you know which one is my favorite.
Yes, I know.
It's Sardis.
Because of the cool story behind it, too. Yeah.
I love that letter so much.
I know. I like that one, too. That's a really cool story.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating? I say this over and over again, how precise the scriptures are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How the theme of the letter, rides through every single aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked how in Sardis they were, referring to coming like a thief in the night.
Right.
And that would really resonate with them because of their history.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
And, I just think it's crazy how we can read 6 verses and talk about it for a whole hour.
I know, right?
Yeah, we're talking in depth here.
Yeah. Talk about an inductive Bible study.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
But it's rich. There's so much to learn.
Oh, I know, right?
Yeah.
And I just feel like we're barely scratching the surface, because we'd be here all day with each one of these episodes. And that's why I continually want to encourage our listeners to do a study of this stuff on your own, because there's a heck of a lot more than what we're providing. I just have this fascination with the book of Revelation. It's my favorite book of the Bible. I just love this book so much. And I feel like in the 21st century especially, we need to thoroughly pick it apart.
Yeah. Because
there's so many differing views on a lot of stuff in this book. Mm-hmm. And so many of us in the church have shied away altogether from the book of Revelation.
That's me.
For all sorts of reasons.
Right.
And in all actuality, I feel like a large majority of church-going folk have been told how to read this book.
Yeah.
How to study this book. How to interpret this book, if you will. Mm-hmm. Even to the point of arriving at certain doctrinal views without ever actually doing the homework. Remember at the beginning of this series, I said we need to be like the Bereans in Acts 17, who received the word with readiness of heart, but searched the scriptures daily to prove whether those things were so.
True. Yeah.
So, in essence, that is your permission, ladies and gentlemen, to not take a word that I say seriously and go and do your own homework. I'm glad you're here listening. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a podcast. And I hope that you find it entertaining and edifying. But ultimately, as I always like to say, my passion is for people to fall in love with Jesus and to fall in love with the scriptures. And so hopefully, if none other than this, my hope is that these episodes through the book of Revelation are spurring you on to this even greater desire to get into and dissect the scriptures even more than you are right now. Mm-hmm. That's what my chief hope is, really. As we approach this book, we saw in chapter 1 that John had this vision. In verse 2 of chapter 1, the bondservant John testifies to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. And later on throughout the book, there's going to be a lot of things that John hears. So literally every single verse that John pens in this entire book are things that he actually saw and actually heard. Mm-hmm. So this is real. This is a real experience that John had while he was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day.
Right.
So remember that this isn't just some made-up thing. This isn't just some mythological idea. This isn't just some vision. John experienced this and saw and heard all of these things. And so I keep coming back to this because we're in the middle, we're soon to be wrapping up the portion of the book that deals with letters to 7 churches. Mm-hmm. And I keep asking the question, why these 7 churches? Because at the end of the first century, around the time that John wrote this book, there was well over 100 flourishing churches. And even probably the most prominent, or I would argue important churches, aren't even mentioned here. Like the Church of Jerusalem, the Church of Rome.
Right.
You know, all of the other 6 churches that Paul wrote to. So there is a specific reason, I believe, that these 7 churches were chosen to receive report cards from Jesus. Mm-hmm. And probably the most provocative of those reasons why is that prophetic level that I believe these letters are written on. And again, I can't build doctrine on it. It's conjecture at best, but it certainly is extremely provocative that when you look at these 7 letters in the order that they are written, they seem to lay out all of church history from the birth of the church at Pentecost all the way through today.
Yeah.
And we've unpacked that as we've gone, haven't we?
We have. That's pretty cool.
The Church of Ephesus and its theme, well, that spoke to the early apostolic era, the apostolic church. The Church of Smyrna and its theme of persecution, well, that spoke to the roughly 250 years after the apostolic era where the church was persecuted heavily. The Church at Pergamum, its theme was the church was married to the world, and that took us all the way up through Constantine and the period of time where the church married the world. The letter to the Church of Thyatira and its theme of pagan practices, we had that whole conversation about the Babylonian priesthood and its migration from Babylon to Pergamum, eventually ended up in Rome. Mm-hmm. That whole theme spoke to the next phase of church history, which was the medieval era, the medieval church. And then in our last episode, we talked about Sardis, that had that remnant that was holding on and surviving in the midst of a church that had nothing good said about it. And that spoke to the period of church history known as the Reformation, where while the vast majority of the quote-unquote church was hunting down, trying to obliterate Protestantism from the face of the planet, there were these reformers, these Protestant ambassadors who stuck to their guns and did not soil their garments. And that took us all the way up to the 18th century in church history. So on this episode, we are going to take a look at the letter to the Church of Philadelphia, which is the 6th of the 7 letters. And we're going to find some really fun and controversial and problematic things as we unpack this letter. I've been warning you guys all along that throughout this series, we are going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble. We've kind of teetered around troublemaking up to this point. I think on this episode, we'll definitely get ourselves into some trouble. But it's going to be fun.
Cool.
We're going to have a good time. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of Philadelphia, why don't we go ahead and read the letter?
Okay.
It's found in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verses 7 through 13. The letter to the Church of Philadelphia. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, He who is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one will open, says this: I know your deeds. Behold, I have put before you an open door, which no one can shut, because you have a little power, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan, who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. I will make them come and bow down at your feet, and make them know that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word of perseverance, I will also keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. I am coming quickly. Hold fast to what you have, so that no one will take your crown. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it any more. And I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The letter to the Church of Philadelphia, ladies and gentlemen. Now, right out of the gate, notice that there's something missing from the structure of this letter.
I don't know.
There's nothing bad said about them.
Oh, yeah. There's. I knew that already.
This is the second of the two churches that Jesus' report card has no demerits. The first one was Smyrna, and now here the second one, Philadelphia.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting about that, historically, is that guess what 2 of these 7 cities, these 7 churches, are still in existence today?
Smyrna and Philadelphia?
Bingo.
Oh.
Their churches still exist, but they are underground because it's in Turkey, which is a very Muslim country. But yes, these cities, these churches, they still very much exist to this day. They're fragmented and a lot smaller, but needless to say, their lampstands never went out. So that's kind of cool.
That is cool.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of Philadelphia, the city. Philadelphia is probably the youngest of the cities that we know of. It was built in the area acquired by Pergamum in 189 BC. Eumenes II, who was the king of Pergamum at the time, he had a younger brother named Attalus II, who would end up becoming his successor. But these two loved each other. These two brothers absolutely loved each other. And not only did they love each other, they liked each other. And they liked each other so much that everyone nicknamed them the brothers. So much so that even on their very coins was a depiction of the two brothers together. And they were always depicted as equals, the way they dressed, their stature, etc. And it's because of their mutual loyalty and affection for one another. The area of Philadelphia was well favored for wine production. So Andy, we would have probably loved it in Philadelphia.
Yeah, probably.
Even to this very day. Dionysus, or Bacchus, the god of wine, was the principal deity in Philadelphia. The city was very well situated on the main road from Rome and Troas to Pergamum, Sardis, and the interior of Phrygia. So it became the virtual getaway to the high central plateau of Asia Minor, and the Romans deliberately set up this location as an outreach or missionary headquarters to promote Greek culture. The spreading of the Greek language, the Greek customs, all of those things. And this city was very, very near the Greco-Asian border. So this missional culture seems to fit even the mood of this letter. Mind you, this missionary effort historically is Greek, but that theme, you can still see that in some of the works of the Church of Philadelphia as well. For many centuries, the city of Philadelphia was known for this promotion or mission of promoting Greek culture. So there's this missionary mentality. Well, the city of Philadelphia went through some name changes over its history as well. The area that surrounds the city of Philadelphia has a very long Greek name that I won't try to pronounce, but it means the burned land because it's a highly volcanic region. So even if you go there today, there's tons of black lava rocks all over the place. And because it's a highly volcanic region, it suffered repeatedly from earthquakes over time.
Oh, dear.
And we've mentioned on previous episodes about this horrible earthquake that happened in the region in 17 AD. Well, Philadelphia was also nearly destroyed in that same earthquake. And the disaster of that 17 AD earthquake devastated Sardis and 10 other cities. And tremors from this earthquake were reported for years afterwards. So because of it, the Philadelphians over time became extremely insecure and afraid because of these constant volcanic tremors that were happening. As a result of that 17 AD earthquake specifically, Philadelphia suffered civic and economic disruption for over 20 years. But because of generous financial relief that came from Tiberius in Rome, they essentially were rescued, and it caused the citizens of Philadelphia to rename the city Neo Caesarea, which means the new city of Caesar.
Oh, okay.
Later on, in the time of Vespasian, who was the successor of Tiberius, he changed the name to Flavia, which was his family name. But none of these name changes last for very long, and eventually Philadelphia soon is revived and renamed Philadelphia. Today, the name of the city is Allah Shahu, which means the city of God in Arabic. So let's take a look at this letter and unpack it.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yep.
All right, in verse 7, to the angel, the angelos, the messenger, most likely the pastor of the church in Philadelphia, write, He who is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one opens, says this. I got to tell you, when it comes to titles, this is a pretty darn good title.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
I mean, this is essentially Jesus naming the unique holiness of himself, that he is true and he is holy and he has the King of David. Like, these are all really incredible idioms, you know. When he says he who is holy, well, we in the church, we have a pretty good understanding of what holiness is, of what holiness refers to be set apart from the rest. But specifically when it applies to God or Christ and his holiness, there's kind of this connotation of judgment and authority that comes alongside it. The kind of holiness that we fear.
Yeah.
Not that we're afraid of God, but we are reverent because of the reality that God is holy and we are not. And we stand bare before him all of the time. So he's asserting the fact that he is this holy one. He says that he is true. And this Greek word here for true is really interesting. It's alethinos, which means real or genuine. And it's in contrast to falsehood. And I just find it interesting that he chooses this as one of his identifying traits, that he is true, the one who is true, the one who is real and genuine, as opposed to all of the other fake stuff that's going on and being worshipped in Philadelphia, like Dionysus, if you will.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
He says that he has the key of David. And let me tell you, commentators, they really have a heck of a time trying to figure out what in the world that is talking about.
Really?
And, you know, I wrestled with it over the years, but I kind of think that the best way to have a better understanding of why Jesus picked this idiom as part of his title is to actually go back and practice the law of first mention and go look in the Old Testament.
Okay.
So let's take a look at some verses in the book of Isaiah, chapter 22. Now, I encourage our listeners to go back and study this passage on their own, because to give you the whole context of what's going on here would take a really long time. But essentially what's happening is that someone by the name of Shebna, who is the treasurer of the kingdom, is about to be replaced.
Okay.
And he's about to be replaced by Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah. That's all I need to tell you to explain it right now.
Okay.
But we pick it up in verse 19, Isaiah chapter 22, verse 19. This is the Lord speaking through the prophet Isaiah. I will depose you from your office, and I will pull you down from your station. Then it will come about in that day that I will summon my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, and I will clothe him in your tunic, and tie your sash securely about him. I will entrust him with your authority, and he will become a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. Verse 22, then I will set the key of the house of David on his shoulder. When he opens, no one will shut. When he shuts, no one will open. And then it goes on from there with some messianic titles that I don't have time to unpack here. But this is the first place that this whole key of David is mentioned. Now, what you need to understand here is that this means that Eliakim is being given full administrative authority in Jerusalem. And this key was literally a heavy key on a loop that hung over his shoulder.
Oh, wow.
So when people in Jerusalem, throughout all the kingdom of Jerusalem, would see him walking around with this key, they knew that Eliakim had the power to grant or deny audience with the king. In other words, he alone provided access to merely the king's presence.
Wow.
So when Jesus says that he has the key of David, well, take that example from Isaiah. He's saying that he has full administrative authority over everything, and that he has the power to grant or deny audience inside the king's throne room.
Wow.
That he alone provides the mere access to be in the presence of the king. That's what he's saying in that idiom.
Wow. That's cool.
Because he repeats again what's in Isaiah. He opens and no one will shut, and he shuts and no one will open. Now, that phrase might ring a bell to a lot of our listeners, whether you're a serious Bible student or not, because you've heard this phrase, the keys to the kingdom.
Right.
It's in the scriptures.
Okay.
The idea of the keys to the kingdom are in the scriptures in several places. We can take a look at Matthew chapter 16, starting in verse 13. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," which means son of Jonah, "because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also say to you that you are Peter." Now, this is a funny play on words here, okay?
Okay.
He doesn't just rename him. There's more going on here. "I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." So Peter is Petros, which means rock, and rock in the Greek is Petro, which means stone. So you got rock and stone.
Yeah.
It's really kind of funny. But catch this, verse 19. "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven." So here's the first place that we see Jesus granting the keys of the kingdom to somebody else. But in all actuality, he's not really giving the keys of the kingdom to Peter, and I'll explain why in a minute, because Peter actually validates this in his epistle. If you flip to 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 4, Peter writes, "And coming to him," this is the Lord, "as to a living stone," there's that word, Petro, "which had been rejected by men, he is choice and precious in the sight of God. You also as living stones," so this is everybody else, "are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For this is contained in Scripture, 'Behold, I lay in Zion a choice stone, a precious cornerstone, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed.' This precious value, then, is for you who believe, but for those who disbelieve, the stone which the builders rejected, this became the very cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. For they stumble because they are disobedient to the word, and to this doom they were also appointed." Now catch this, verse 9. "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Now, just as a side note, in that verse where Peter says that you, the church, are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, that's quite the paradox, because the priestly line was from the tribe of Levi, and the royal line was from the tribe of Judah. They were separate.
Oh.
So here he's saying that the church is both. Well, what's interesting is that in Judeo-Christian history, there are only 3 people who have been qualified to occupy both the royal line and the priestly line. The first one is Melchizedek.
Right.
The second one is Christ. And guess who the third one is?
Who?
The church.
Oh.
Because he's saying it right here.
Okay.
So this is, I wanted to kind of derail our conversation just slightly to show you how Peter validates that the keys to the kingdom weren't just given to him. They were given to Christ's bride as a whole. And another way to back that up, flip back to the book of Matthew in chapter 18 in the infamous church discipline passage. Jesus says in Matthew 18, verse 18, "Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven." So in other words, in Matthew 16, Jesus says he's giving the keys of the kingdom to Peter, the rock that he will build the church on. But in 18, he's telling all of the apostles that they have the keys to the kingdom, and what they bind or loose will be bound and loosed in heaven. And then in 1 Peter, he fully validates all of this by saying that we all are the royal priesthood, that we all carry that key.
Interesting. Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that is cool.
I just think that's so cool. So back to the letter in Revelation chapter 3, all of these idioms, they speak of the Lord's kingship, they speak of his sovereign rule, his messianic authority over all the royal riches of heaven. They are symbolic of his authority because he's the one alone who grants access to the king's chambers. He's the one who opens and no one can shut, and shuts and no one can open, which speaks to his sovereignty. In other words, only he gets to decide who gets to enter the kingdom. Only he gets to decide who enters the throne room. Only he gets to decide who can come to him. And all of these are idioms of his authority alone to grant access to God. And he says that he's holy because there's none other like him. There's no one else like him. I just find all of that amazing.
That is.
I mean, you talk about titles.
That's a good one.
That's a pretty darn good list of titles, I should say.
Yeah.
All right, so we managed to make it through one verse. Let's move on. Verse 8, I know your deeds. I saw what you did.
Right?
Behold, I have put before you an open door which no one can shut. There's that idiom again, the open door which no one can shut. Well, this whole open door thing is pretty cool. It's access that no one can take away. It's access to him, but it's also access to other places that nobody else can shut. It's like a two-dimensional meaning here. And no one can take away this open door. So like doors, they're open for access into something or closed in order to keep those who are unwanted out of something. And they're sealed in order to preserve what's inside of something. But this open door could be idiomatic of the missional culture in Philadelphia. The same could be very true of this church. What's interesting, though, is that he says that they have a little power. It's possible that this church was not very big.
Yeah.
Because it might be referring to the size of their membership. It could also be referring to their inability to open the door themselves.
Yeah.
It could also be referring to the fact that they cannot come to Christ on their own. And it also could be referring to the fact that they cannot access Christ's throne room on their own. In other words, they know this. They know that they need him to do it for them.
Right.
He says, you have kept my word. They have stood firm in their position and belief that the scriptures are the inspired and authoritative word of God. There must apparently have been some denial of the scriptures in Philadelphia as authority.
Interesting, yeah.
And that's kind of a theme that is synonymous with historical church ideologies that, you know, as we've discussed on previous episodes, that for a major chunk of time, there was a debate as to whether or not the scriptures had the final say, which essentially spurred on the Reformation, right?
Right.
There's a lot that you can safely assume here when he says, you have kept my word. But then he says, and have not denied my name. This speaks of ambassadorship. Now, think about the 10 Commandments, Andy.
Yeah.
What's one of the 10 Commandments that pertains to a name? Thou shalt not take...
The name of the Lord in vain.
Right. And what do we tend to think that that means?
Well, we think that that means like swearing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's what that commandment is referring to at all.
Oh, okay.
Because this speaks of ambassadorship here in Revelation 3. That when you say that you belong to Jesus, there is the expectation that you represent him well. And so in regards to the commandment of not taking the Lord's name in vain, it's ambassadorship.
Oh.
It's not being a false representation of God to others.
I like that better.
But remember, Jesus says in all these letters that he knows our works. So he knows whether or not we are honoring his name and being good or bad ambassadors for him.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of verses that talk about for his name's sake.
So I just think that kind of intensifies the conversation a little bit more here, that even though they have a little power here in this church in Philadelphia, and even though they've kept his word, ultimately, they have not denied the name of Christ. They have remained good, faithful witnesses, ambassadors for him. And then he goes on and says some weird stuff in verse 9. Behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not but lie. Now, we've talked about these people before. Now, we referenced this people group, this synagogue of Satan, in the letter to the church of Smyrna. And here again, Jesus brings them up. And again, remember, Smyrna is the first of the two letters that nothing bad is said about them.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of ironic that in the two churches that get positive report cards from beginning to end from the Lord himself are dealing with this group of individuals that Christ himself labels the, quote, synagogue of Satan, who say they are Jews but really are not. They lie. And it's interesting because in Philadelphia's letter, he adds the part, they lie, but in the letter to Smyrna, he doesn't say that.
Huh.
Why is that interesting? Because in the letter to Philadelphia, what's the first title that Jesus gives of himself?
Well, he's holy and true.
True. Versus the lie of the synagogue of Satan. See how it all fits together?
Yeah.
The precision of Scripture is ridiculous. Now, there are a lot of scholars, there are a lot of commentators that really, in my opinion, go off the deep end and try to say that this synagogue of Satan might be people who are reconstructionists or replacement theologians. In other words, in our vernacular, the best way to summarize that, individuals in the church that believe that because the nation of Israel rejected Christ as their Messiah, that they have forfeit all of God's promises to them, and the church has now replaced Israel.
Oh.
Now, all of that might be a possibility of who Jesus is referring to here. I don't know. But I still hold to the more likelihood that he's referring to the legalists of this time. These people who deny the finished work of Christ at Calvary. Think of the Judaizers in the book of Galatians again.
Right.
That whole letter to the church of Galatia is about dealing with legalism, returning to this works-oriented faith, that Christ's death on the cross at Calvary was not enough for salvific work to be complete. So it's my opinion that that is more likely who Jesus is referring to, because at the time that John is writing this letter, legalism is one of those four tares that is sown into the church culture.
Yeah.
That the church as a whole is having to face on pretty much a daily basis. Apparently in Smyrna and now in Philadelphia, there's an abundance of this activity going on, whichever it might be.
So glad we don't have to deal with that these days, right?
Yeah,
Just
right.
kidding.
Yeah. That's for a whole different conversation.
Right.
But he says that he will intervene on their behalf. He says, I will make them come and bow down at your feet and make them know that I have loved you. This speaks of this whole, making the earth your footstool thing.
Oh, yeah.
That Jesus is going to make the earth his footstool, but here he's saying that he's going to make them literally come and bow down before their feet and make them know that I have loved you. It's kind of interesting. Eventually there's going to be this day of vengeance that the Lord is going to have. Think about it this way. Back in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus is in the synagogue and he reads from the scrolls of Isaiah.
Yeah.
And like in Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 and 2, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to the prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. And in Luke chapter 4, Jesus stops there.
Right.
In our English Bibles, there's a comma.
Oh, okay.
What's interesting is that if Jesus would have read one more line from the scroll of Isaiah, this is what he would have read. And the day of vengeance of our God. Now, why Jesus stopped before reading that line is because the very next thing he says in Luke chapter 4, he closes the scroll and he says, today these scriptures are fulfilled in your sight.
Right.
He couldn't say that if he would have read that line. So when I talk about the precision of Scripture and the little yots and tittles and all that stuff, this stuff excites me at how intricately detailed these conversations are, these letters, these instructions, these report cards. There's going to come a point where there's going to be a day of vengeance. And part of that day of vengeance is the fulfillment of what Jesus says here to the church in Philadelphia, that he will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan to come and bow down at their feet and know that he's loved them. the Philadelphian church folk. Now, what's interesting, and I'll get to this a little bit later, historically in Philadelphia, this actually happened for a very long time.
Oh, really?
Literally happened for a very long time, but we'll get to that in a little while.
Okay.
Now we get ourselves into some trouble.
Okay.
Because verse 10, I believe, has caused so many problems and so much friction based on secondary and tertiary issues within all of church culture, specifically eschatological conversations. And so I feel the need to really unpack this verse to explain from the actual Greek. So you know that it's not me talking and it's not the English talking, it's the Greek talking. We're going to take this verse almost word for word in the Greek.
Okay.
And here it is. Because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I will also keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. Now, first of all, the easy part. This is the good thing that you have done, Church of Philadelphia. You have kept the word of my perseverance, literal patience. In other words, Jesus is saying, I have been patient for a very long time. In 2024, the Lord has been patient for about 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And they have kept that patience in Philadelphia. And because they have been faithful, that they have kept his word, that they have not denied his name, that they have kept the word of his patience, they have dug in, Jesus says, I will also keep you. See, kept and keep.
Okay.
They go together. I will keep you from the hour of testing. That hour which is about to come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. Now, I'm going to say this and explain this as delicately as I possibly can.
Okay.
If you just read this at face value, which a lot of folks do, and it's okay, there are many who interpret this one verse as evidence and or proof of what's known as the rapture.
Okay.
That there are a specific group of Christians that the Lord is going to miraculously snatch from the earth. Now, I'm not going to get into a rapture conversation here, but if that's the case, then how come this church is still there?
Yeah.
In 2024. Prophetically speaking, you can read this at face value and assume, I will keep you from the hour of testing, translates into, I'm going to snatch you out so that you don't have to go through testing, this hour that's about to come upon the whole world. That's fair. I get that. However, this is one of those times where it's really unfortunate that the English Bible translators used the words that they used.
Yeah.
Because when you look at this verse in the Greek, it actually says something very interesting. Because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I also will keep you from. Now, the Greek word there for keep, it means to attend to carefully, to take care of, to guard. In other words, it's to preserve. It isn't to take out of.
Okay.
It isn't to remove from. When he says keep, it's like being protected inside of a keep. That you are going to be preserved while this time is occurring. Okay?
Yeah.
Again, I didn't say it. That's literally what the Greek says.
Okay.
I will keep you. I will preserve you through this time. And what time is this? This hour of testing. Now, many people want to say that this is the tribulation, and not just the tribulation, but the great tribulation. We've talked about this before, that many eschatological scholars and commentators and preachers and teachers have this title for a specific period of time known as the, quote, Great Tribulation. And many people want to attribute that to this phrase, this time or hour of great testing. There's two problems with that. The first problem is we've already addressed the subject of tribulation which is thalipsis in the Greek, that John is a fellow partaker of, and that the church of Thyatira was expressly promised that if they didn't repent, they were going to face thalipsis.
Oh.
In fact, they were going to face mega thalipsis, great tribulation. Remember, we talked about this. So that's the first problem. This isn't speaking of a period of, quote, great tribulation. The second problem is that this is a different Greek word here.
Yeah.
It's not thalipsis. It's parosmos, which literally means a trial of man's fidelity, integrity, virtue, and consistency. It's an enticement to sin, temptation, whether arising from the desires or from the outward circumstances. It's an internal temptation to sin. It's of the temptation by which the devil sought to divert Jesus the Messiah from his divine errand. Now, that doesn't sound like tribulation.
No.
I mean, did Jesus go through great tribulation? No, he was tempted by the devil.
Right.
It speaks of adversity. It speaks of affliction. It speaks of trouble. Sent by God and serving as a test to prove one's character, faith, and holiness. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, this doesn't sound at all like they're going to be removed from something. This sounds completely like they are going to be preserved through this time of testing that God is sending to test the character on earth. That includes this temptation to sin. Now, some might say, Heath, that sounds absolutely ridiculous, that God would drive his people into this time of great tribulation. It does sound ridiculous. However, didn't the Holy Spirit drive Jesus out into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil? Now, don't get so cocky in the church to think that we are above this.
Well, I was also thinking of Job.
Absolutely. Good point.
I mean, he did experience physical ailments as well, but, it kind of makes me
he
think
was
of
being
testing.
Yeah, and he was being poked and prodded by his wife and his closest friends. Curse God and die, right?
Right.
So in the Greek, this is not saying I'm going to remove you from. In the Greek, this is saying I'm going to preserve you through. I'm going to keep you. While this time of mass temptation to sin is coming upon you. Now, I want you to notice two things here. He does say that I will keep you from it, but he doesn't say I will keep you immune from it. I need you to catch that.
Right.
Because there are theologians that have the same view that I have, but they take it to the extent that they aren't going to be affected by this time of great testing. Jesus is not saying that. What he is saying is that I'm going to preserve you through it. Nothing more than that. Think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. When the flood happened, Noah and his family were inside the ark 7 days before the rains came, and then 40 days and 40 nights while it rained, and then the extra amount of time until the waters receded and the boat landed on the mountains of Ararat. Now, I ask you two questions. Andy?
Yeah.
First of all, do you think that was a breeze?
No.
For them to experience, even though they were safe inside the boat?
Yeah, it probably wasn't pleasant.
For lots of reasons.
Yeah.
Second question. But did God preserve them?
Yes.
Did he keep them safe?
Yes.
You see the picture?
Yeah.
You see the picture. Now, just as a side note, Jesus refers to as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man returns. So he's talking about a period of time where he is going to keep a certain group of people preserved through it.
Interesting.
I'll just leave that there.
Yeah.
The second thing that I want you to notice, because this verse is very important here. This is probably the key verse in chapters 2 and 3. The second thing I want you to notice here, he says, I will keep you, I will preserve you through the time of testing, the hour of testing, the hour which is about to come upon who?
The whole world.
The whole world. Not just unbelievers, the whole world. Not just Americans, although it feels like it sometimes. The whole entire world. But who is this temptation? Who is this testing? Who is this time of trial focused on?
Those who dwell on the earth.
Those who dwell on the earth. The earth dwellers. Correct. This is a very common phrase used throughout Revelation and several times in the Old Testament that doesn't literally speak to where somebody lives, but where their heart is. Mm-hmm. That they are focused, their heart is focused on what is on the earth. Think about where Jesus says, set your mind on things above where moth and rust do not destroy.
Right.
Things in heaven, not on things of earth. Right?
Yeah.
This is a time, a specific period of time, because there is a definite article in the Greek, specific time that is about to come upon the whole world, specifically to test the earth dwellers, those who are focused on the things of this world. Those are the main key points that I want you to see in this verse. This isn't talking about a people group being removed. They're still there, and they're going to be preserved through it. It's a specific period of time, and all of the main priority and focus of that time is towards those whose sole purpose and faith and existence revolves around anything that matters on earth. Read that hedonistic.
Yeah.
You catch what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's interesting.
This is a specific period of time when God will cause the rebellious heart of man to completely reveal itself in order to make it obvious who the true Christians are. Who are they? Who is being tested? Who's being put through it? That's what you have to notice in that verse there. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
6 times in the book of Revelation alone, this phrase, the earth dwellers, is used, and it always refers to unbelievers. Always does. They are those who love making the world their home. And who are we as Christians? This world is not our home. We are pilgrims passing through. Our home is in a kingdom that is not of this world. Right?
Right.
So that's who this time is focused on to test. And that's why those in Philadelphia will be preserved through it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, enough with that trouble. Verse 11. I am coming quickly. Boy, those are some really great promising words, aren't they?
Yeah.
Come, Lord Jesus, right? I am coming quickly. When I come, it will happen quick. Like, picture it this way. Since our Lord ascended and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God,
Yeah.
he has been preparing to come. Now, I can only imagine the emotional aspect of that waiting and that excitement from my human finite brain. Like, chomping at the bit, can't sit still, can't stand still, looking back over my shoulder like, is it time? Is it time? Is it time? And as flippant and as irresponsible and borderline irreverent as all of that sounds, you can't tell me for 1 second that the Lord isn't excited to come and rescue his people.
Oh, I'm sure. I would think so.
And so he says, I'm coming quickly. When all of this goes down, I'm coming quickly. Now, just as another side note, this is the 3rd time in one of these letters where he specifically mentions his coming. So which category does the letter to the Church of Philadelphia also fall into? Group B. So we have Thyatira, we have Sardis, and we have Philadelphia that all specifically speak to the Lord literally coming.
Interesting.
I'll leave that there for now.
Okay.
I am coming quickly. Hold fast to what you have so that no one will take your crown. I love this verse so much. I wish that I had all day to tell you why. But this is that doctrine of imminence, that the Lord could come at any time. And when he comes, it will be sudden. He says, hold fast. Now, in the Greek, this is a really interesting term. It doesn't just mean to grab onto something. It literally means to grab onto it and master it.
Oh.
He says, hold fast to what you have. Grab onto it and master it so that no one will take your crown. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the second time that we've had a crown mentioned in these letters.
Oh.
Guess which letter was the first time?
Smyrna.
Smyrna. But notice there's a major difference here. In Smyrna, if they pursue unto death, Jesus will give them the Stephanos, the victor's crown. Here, to the Church of Philadelphia, he says, hold fast, take hold of, and master what you have so that no one will take your Stephanos.
Oh.
In other words, it implies they already have it.
Yeah.
Because how can someone take something away if they don't have it already? You follow me? Mm-hmm. Like, because of Christ, because of his name, because of his word, because of his perseverance, and the fact that the Philadelphian church has kept it, this implies that they already have the Stephanos. That's staggering to me. Hold fast to what you have so that no one will take it. As I said, they must already have it. This idea of holding fast, well, when you get to the 7th century, the Muslims had pretty much risen up all over this area of what's modern-day Turkey, but Asia Minor. And during the 14th century, Philadelphia stood alone against the entire Turkish Empire as a free, self-governing Christian city in the midst of the entire Turkish land. Now, you talk about holding fast.
Yeah.
You talk about digging in. You talk about becoming a pro, an expert, a master at what you have so that no one will take your crown. These people learned. They learned how to fight. They learned how to defend themselves. They learned how to resist to the end. They were besieged twice by the Turkish armies. The people were even reduced to the verge of starvation. But somehow they held fast. And it wasn't until around 1390 that they finally succumbed to a combined military force of the Turkish and Byzantine armies that they fell. Nearly 1,300 years after this letter was written, they held fast.
Wow.
So powerful.
That's a long time.
So powerful. Like, I just love how all of this ties together in the literal sense to what the church was dealing with literally, to the history of the city. And I'm going to show you prophetically how this fits in with church history as well in a few minutes here.
Okay.
But he says, the message to the overcomer, verse 12. And again, it's in the body of the letter. Another reason why this is in group B. He who overcomes, 1 John 5:4, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Now, just as a side note, a pillar would be an interesting idiom here. Do you remember why? Because in the area where Philadelphia was, there was all that seismic activity that went on.
Yep.
So if they were going to, a pillar was symbolic of something sturdy and firm that could not be moved.
Right. And
Jesus says to the overcomer, he will make them a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it anymore. That speaks of security to me. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. Boy, that's a lot of amazing promises. This is the promise to the ones who have overcome the world through their faith in Jesus Christ alone for salvation. And all of these idioms add up to this. They will be with Christ forever. They will be proudly put on display like a bride on her wedding day for everyone to see, because they have been labeled or identified as his. And then he closes out the letter with, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. This is for everyone with an earlobe. Look at what's going on in this church. This is a church that is pleasing to the Lord. There's no condemnation. There's no threats. There's no warnings.
Right.
You don't see them being praised for having all the right answers. You don't see them being praised for having the correct doctrinal positions. You don't see them being praised for having the best hot takes or having the best comebacks.
Well, they haven't denied his name.
Yeah.
They've kept the word.
Exactly. They're not being praised because they're the most victimized or because they're the most outspoken or because they're the most popular or having the most followers. Now, they weren't a perfect church because there's no such thing, right?
Right.
But they were faithful and true and loyal to Jesus. They were his faithful witnesses. They were his ambassadors. They lived up to his name. And they were blessed by Jesus by having his kingdom opened up to them with all of its treasures. And that's the letter to the Church of Philadelphia. This whole new name concept. Now remember, in Sardis there was the name, but that was the label. You have this label that you want to identify yourself as, but you're actually dead.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But here, Jesus gives them the new name. Jesus, there's name all over the place in this letter too, but it's different. It's the same word in the Greek, anoma, which means label, but notice it's not a label that they pick for themselves like the church in Sardis. It's a label or identity that's given to them by Christ.
Right.
Because they have been faithful. I just find that amazing. The contradiction here. You could almost put Sardis and Philadelphia side by side and just look at this serious contrast between the two of what they were dealing with and why and how the Lord dealt with them and what he thought of them and what their characteristics were. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is.
Now, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So obviously in each one of these letters, there's this ear statement. So there has to be some sort of application to all of us, to all of the churches of all time, and to all of us throughout history. So in Ephesus, the application was devotion, not just doctrine. Remember, they were really good at doctrine, but they had lost their first love. And that the Lord demands devotion, not just doctrine. In Smyrna, endure persecution. In Pergamum, stand against the world. Remember, that was the church that married the world.
Oh, right, right.
And Jesus' application to us is to not be married to the world, but to oppose it, to stand against it, if you will. In Thyatira, the application is to abandon pagan practices. With Sardis, the application is to be watchful and diligent, to wake up, to snap out of it, right? And here in Philadelphia, it would seem that the application is missionary outreach, is to keep on keeping on doing what you're doing and hold fast and master it. Obviously, the church in Philadelphia found all kinds of favor in the eyes of the Lord. And this whole concept of an open door, not only is the kingdom of heaven open to them, but the world is open to them as well. Because remember, he says that I will make them come and bow down at your feet and make them know that I have loved you.
Right.
They have this open access to the world, if you will. Guess what Philadelphia means?
The city of brotherly love.
Well, that's acceptable, but that's not literally what it means.
What?
It's two Greek words.
Okay.
Delphi or Delphia meaning city. But phila actually doesn't mean brotherly love. It means favorable.
Oh, okay.
It means friendly or favorable. So remember, there was this whole culture because of the two brothers who liked each other so much that there was this whole kind of treat each other favorably kind of a thing, right? That was the culture there. So this church found favor in the eyes of the Lord. This is a city of favorable behavior, if you will. And probably the number one temptation that the church in Philadelphia had to face was this temptation to go soft, to like chill out in their faith. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yet they stood firm. They had a little power, but it was powerful enough for them to be masterful of it. Mm-hmm. And like the world was their oyster, if you will, with missionary efforts. This whole concept of open doors, it makes me think of 1 Corinthians chapter 16.
Oh.
Paul says in verse 8 and 9, he says, I will remain in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective service has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. You see, even though the doors are open for Paul to go and be an evangelist and plant churches, etc., because that's what Paul did, right? 3 missionary journeys. Uh-huh. He is aware that there are adversaries of all kinds everywhere.
No kidding.
And that's kind of an important point, that when it comes to our evangelistic efforts, whatever that might look like, when it comes to our gospel sharing efforts outside of the 4 walls of the church, if you will, there is an adversary. There are adversaries. I have this one interesting little factoid that I've been dying to share with everybody, and I'm so glad that I finally get to bring this up here. It has to do with the Philippines.
Okay.
In the Philippines, their economic situation is really, really bad. And it has been for a long time. So much so that a lot of the young men and women leave the Philippines to go find work in other countries. Mm-hmm. And when they go to the other countries and find work, they send, a portion of their wages back home so that their families can survive, right?
Right.
Well, for the longest time, even up till most recently, the most popular place for the young men and women of the Philippines to go and find work is actually in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay.
And they've been doing this, like this is where the majority of these displaced people from the Philippines are going to find work. It's not America. It's actually Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. Just out of curiosity, Andy.
Yeah.
Ballpark figure. How many Filipino people do you think have steady jobs in the nation of Saudi Arabia?
All of them. They wouldn't be there otherwise.
I know, but give me a number. Like, can you guess what the number might be?
I don't know, like 1 million?
Just shy of 1 million.
Wow. There
are just shy of 1 million Filipinos in Saudi Arabia that are earning stable incomes and thriving. And the vast majority of them are Christians.
Oh.
Now, remember, this is in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Wouldn't it be just like God to open a door in a hostile Muslim country like that for Christian people from the Philippines to go in and do the work of an evangelist besides earning an honest living?
That's pretty interesting.
Well,
That's a good point.
You might call me crazy, but it kind of is in the Lord's nature. I mean, think about it this way.
Yeah.
The Lord orchestrated Rome to tax everyone, which caused Mary and Joseph to go down to Bethlehem, where Jesus would be born.
Yeah. Oh.
Or think about in Genesis with the famine over all the earth that forced a group of 70 Israelites to move to Egypt so they wouldn't starve.
Right.
So think about the increasing anti-Christian movement of today.
Uh-huh.
I would argue that the doors are wide open everywhere. So let's look at the prophetic application of this real quick. Up to this point, we've gone through now 6 letters. Our previous 5 letters have brought us up through the Reformation period, which is roughly the early 19th century. Well, something interesting started happening in the church as a whole in the early 18th century. There started this kind of reemergence of a focus on eschatology. And what I mean by that is not the study of end times and, the things that we in 21st century church culture would associate with eschatology or the thought of eschatology. But what was really the prominent idea was this focus on teaching about the second coming of Christ. And that was a good thing, but it was also a bad thing in some ways too. Because I mentioned this idea of the rapture. What's interesting is that the concept of the rapture was not something that was being talked about in the church until the early 19th century. So some people would say that that's new theology.
Oh, I didn't. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
However, it wasn't the prominent idea. The prominent idea was focused on the teaching of the second coming of Christ in general.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening was this movement, this resurgence of emphasis on not just soteriology or how a person is saved, but also the end of all things with the Lord's return. It caused what was labeled as a period of time called the Great Awakening.
Oh, yeah, the Great Awakening. Mm-hmm.
And this was a series of religious revivals in Protestant churches that began around 1726 and peaked in the 1740s.
Is that like the holiness movement?
That was towards the end.
Okay.
But yes, that's part of it too. The holiness movement begins in the early 1900s, give or take 10 years. Some say at the end of the 1800s. Some say at the beginning of the 1900s. So right around the turn of the century is when the holiness movement kicked in.
Okay.
But it's interesting, this concept of these quote unquote religious revivals.
Mm-hmm.
Remember earlier I talked about the renaming of the city of Philadelphia?
Yeah.
And I used a specific word when I mentioned that it went back to being called Philadelphia, because this whole idea of favorable behavior and treatment of one another caused a revival in their culture, and they went back to the name Philadelphia.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. So it's funny how that literal history of Philadelphia mirrors church history, in that coming out of the Reformation period, which was a focus on proper doctrine and theology around soteriology. And then on the coattails of that, with that remnant, you have this little power, wink, wink, that is revived into this overall conversation of not just the salvation of Jesus Christ, but the return of Jesus Christ. And it thrusts the church as a whole, specifically in Europe and especially in China, all of this incredible missionary work.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it's fascinating. And I encourage all of you, go back and study. Grab that Haley's Bible Handbook, go on the internet, do whatever you got to do. When you see what was going on in the church worldwide, globally, from the end of the 18th century for about 1,000 years, it's pretty incredible. And yet, it's just these little small pockets of little power, if you will.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's
so
cool.
it's the Great Awakening was a series of religious revivals. It began in 1726, peaked in the 1740s. It was revived again in the 1790s, but less emotionally charged. And then there was a third movement that was, give or take, around the 1850s, which led into the early 20th century. And then you enter into the holiness movement in the early 1900s. So it would seem that once again, we have an overall theme of a letter here that speaks to a period of time in church history in order.
It does correspond, doesn't it?
It's starting to creep me out.
Starting.
Yeah. If it hasn't already, I'm starting to become thoroughly creeped out by this. But
in a good way.
yes. But I want you to notice two things. The first thing, and I'm going to get myself into trouble here.
Right.
In the letter to the Church of Philadelphia, in verse 12, the message to the overcomer,
Yeah.
you have this name, this label, this identity that Jesus gives to his overcomers.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the Lord's servants are marked. Now I ask you, are they literally marked with something? Or is it a spiritual identification?
Well, spiritual, yeah, spiritual.
Interesting. We'll talk more about that when we get to chapter 13.
Oh, okay. Oh, dear.
The second and more important thing that I want to say in closing is that, ladies and gentlemen, in 2024, even in the midst of all of this anti-Christian upheaval and uprising, that in and of itself is a sign that the missional work of the gospel has an open door. And I would argue that it's more wide open than it ever has been. The question that I have, are we going to go through it?
And that's all we have to say about that.
Thank you for listening to the Churchosity podcast, The Postscripts. On our next episode, we'll be taking a look at the letter to the Church of Laodicea, which is the 7th and final letter. That's going to imply some pretty interesting things. But until next time, this is the Churchosity podcast personnel saying, peace.